Today, we're going to talk about and clarify how a Chapter 13 or a Chapter 7 bankruptcy affects your ability to use a VA home loan, both from an eligibility perspective and from a qualification perspective, because those are the two main components of using your VA home loan. We're also going to break down some of the timelines that are required around a bankruptcy. And look, guys, the thing is that life happens and it shouldn't hold you back from home ownership. It's really understanding the dynamics that go into your financial situation that's going to allow you to get through that and get to where you want to go. And on our channel, we provide a lot of information around credit and budgeting, which is the things that can lead to filing for a Chapter 13 or a Chapter 7, right? So this is designed, or today's video is designed for someone that has already is thinking about filing for these, or in the process of going through it, or has already gotten out of it, and they want to know how this affects them and what they can do, okay? So there's basically two types of bankruptcies that you can file from a consumer standpoint, because businesses also have a separate one. You have both a Chapter 7 and a Chapter 13 bankruptcy. A Chapter 13 essentially is where the debt is straight liquidated, and you start with fresh debt. Meaning that, like, let's say you have 10 credit cards totaling $25,000. You file bankruptcy, that $25,000 of credit cards is going to be wiped. Chapter 13 is where you go into a restructuring payment system, where basically they take that same $25,000 in debt and then they spread that over a 2-3 year period, and sometimes up to 5 years, where you restructure the debt and repay and pay off the debtors that you took money out against. The reason why I think a lot of times it makes sense to go Chapter 7, because you can straight liquidate. But the thing, though, with that is you have to qualify for that. So if you make too much money, then the court might say, well, you can't do a Chapter 7. You're going to have to do a Chapter 13, in which case, depending on how they structure it, could be a good thing for you. Sometimes it might, but they're also not going to put you in a financial burden. So they're not going to make the payments so high for you that you won't be able to make them and relapse. But it's important to understand what your budget is and how you spend money, because the court may look at it one way where you're thinking a different way as far as what your monthly expenses are. But also you might have to cut down on those expenses because of going through a Chapter 13. Now, the way the credit impact on a bankruptcy is pretty significant, okay? Typically, somebody that's going into a bankruptcy is already going to have multiple eights on their credit report, and typically your credit score is going to be in the 500s, if not the 400s. But again, time will cure all. Definitely don't get discouraged with that. But the main thing that you want to understand with the bankruptcy, and once it actually happens, is that once you've actually filed, most of your debt's going to be cleared as long as it's eligible for the bankruptcy. One thing to note is that student loans, you can include them, but they're not going to be discharged like in a Chapter 7 bankruptcy, because federal debt is not going to be discharged. If you have a VA home loan, if you include it in a bankruptcy, depending on how it's structured, if you keep the home and you go into a repayment structure, okay, yes, you can do that, and it's going to reflect that on your credit report. But if you do lose your home in a foreclosure with a VA home loan, you do lock out a portion of your benefits, if not all your benefits, to use the VA home loan, basically requiring you to have a down payment moving forward. So those are things that you need to consider, and we'll do a separate video just on understanding foreclosures and short sales. The other piece to that is that a bankruptcy is going to stay on your credit report for 10 years. So lenders will be able to see it for up to 10 years. And after the 10-year mark, this is from the discharge date, you can contact the bureaus to have them release that. The nice thing with the Chapter 7 is that basically, you start the process, and a couple months later it gets discharged, and then that's your discharge date to basically have your 10-year waiting period. On a Chapter 13, it's a little bit different, because you filed, then up to 5 years later, then it gets discharged, all your debts get paid, and then you can go and then you have to wait. The 10-year period starts from that time. So let's break down a little bit more detail on a Chapter 13 and how it works. So I mentioned that it's basically a repayment plan. You renegotiate with all the creditors, and it's not necessarily going to be you. It's going to be your attorney or the trustee that's going to be appointed by the court that's going to basically manage and pay all the debt that you have. And that's going to be the key to this, is that you have to make all your payments on time. The waiting period on a VA home loan on a Chapter 13 is 1 year. Okay, so you typically are going to wait 1 year from the time that you started making your payments. And the reason why they do that is because they need to show a 12-month payment history of on-time payments. So if you also have other debt that is not included in the Chapter 13, you also have to pay all of that on time. You cannot have one blemish in those 12 months, because it's technically what's called a manual underwrite, where an underwriter looks at it and makes that decision, and then they basically underwrite it to what the VA has says. And again, VA loan is phenomenal. It's extremely loose with its credit requirements, but there's going to be parameters around understanding how someone pays debt back. And so what they want to see to show that you've reestablished your ability to make payments is by looking at the last 12 months of the process. Okay. And to my knowledge, there's no lender that will do less than 12 months because, again, it's kind of like overlaid with what the VA's requirement is for having 12 months of on-time payments. And if you're going into a Chapter 13 or Chapter 7, you're going to have lates leading up to that. That's why you're going into a restructuring process, because you can't make your payments. And then the difference with this, the Chapter 13 as well, is that you are required to get approval from the trustee, like the judge or the person handling your bankruptcy, to buy a home. So not only, like, let's say the VA says, like, yes, you can buy a home. Well, the other thing is that the judge has to also agree with that. And remember, the VA is very loose on its requirements. So you can do a 60% debt to income, 70% debt to income ratio, but will the court allow that? So you want to ask those questions ahead of time. So let's talk about a Chapter 7. That's a straight up liquidation, right? So if you have $50,000, $100,000, $200,000, $500,000 in debt, then they could literally straight up liquidate all of it. And basically you just need to monitor your credit report, because all of those debts should be moved off your credit report. And again, like we mentioned earlier, both a Chapter 13 and 7 will stay in your credit report for 7 years. Now, when it comes to your VA home loan eligibility on a Chapter 7 bankruptcy, it's going to be a 2-year period from the time that it was discharged, okay? So that's going to be the typical 2 years. Now, what I'm going to tell you guys right now is straight from the VA handbook, okay? If a bankruptcy was discharged within the last 1 to 2 years, it is probably not possible, I like how they say that, probably not possible, to determine if a borrower or spouse has sufficient credit risk unless they meet 2 requirements, which this is like where they get you every time, because people are like, oh, well, the VA says you can do this, but can you really? And that's why they say 1 to 2 years, because remember, less than a year and you're not with no on-time payments, you can't use the VA loan anyways for manual purposes under how it works. So the 1 to 2 year mark, basically you need to reestablish credit and have all your payments on time, okay, which makes sense. So if you straight liquidated everything that you have and you have no credit, you have to reestablish credit. That's really hard when you just have a bankruptcy, because who's going to give you money? Well, there's credit cards out there. I think they're horrible, but you're kind of in a position where you have to take something, or do a secured credit card, which is a good option. Remember, this is a temporary fix to this, so just stick with it and just get yourself in a better position. And then the other part is that if a bankruptcy was caused by circumstances beyond your or your spouse's control, this is extremely hard to prove, but what the VA does allow for is unemployment, prolonged strikes, medical bills not covered by insurance, to name a few. But what's typically not covered and oftentimes comes up is that, hey, I went through a divorce situation, my credit got totally screwed up. That is typically not considered a something that's outside your control or your control of your circumstances, which I think that's kind of crazy, but that's how it works. And again, the big key is reestablishing credit. People from bankruptcies relapsing into having too much debt, possibly multiple bankruptcies. You obviously don't want to avoid that. The only way you can do that is by budgeting and understanding your credit. And we got plenty of videos around that on the channel. So when you guys are ready to take those steps, a couple things that need to happen if you file the Chapter 13 bankruptcy. Got to talk to the attorney and make sure everything's going to be okay and to see if they have any parameters around that. The other thing you guys can do is schedule a call with us, which is in the description below. And, we'll spend time with you, go through your situation and let you know, like, hey, this is where you stand with your current financials. But also make sure you go to annualcreditreport.com, get a copy of your free credit report because someone like me will need to look at that. And we can help anybody across the country, including territories in the U.S. And there's plenty of people that we help on a monthly basis that have gone through a bankruptcy, life events that have happened, and they've been able to utilize their VA home loan. So I hope you guys learned some stuff today. Please hit the like and subscribe button, and I'll catch you soon.